They thought my father left me nothing. They thought I was weak. But they didn't know he spent 10 years recording them. My father died on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not in a hospital surrounded by machines, not holding anyone's hand. He died alone in his study, sitting upright in the same leather chair he'd owned longer than I'd been alive, a cup of coffee cold beside him, papers neatly stacked, pen capped, as if he'd simply paused mid-thought and decided not to continue. That part felt intentional. Everything about my father usually was. The call came at 6:12 a.m. By 6:20, I was fully awake. By 6:25, I already knew what the rest of my life was going to feel like. Quiet, heavy, permanent. People think grief is loud, crying, breaking down, screaming into pillows. That wasn't mine. Mine was the kind that sat in your chest and refused to move, like furniture you didn't remember buying but somehow had to live around. The funeral was small. That should have surprised people, given who my father was. But he'd never liked crowds. He believed large gatherings encouraged lies, said people performed when too many eyes were watching. Only family, a few old colleagues, 2 lawyers I didn't recognize, and a woman I definitely did. She stood near the back, black dress, perfect posture, dry eyes. My stepmother, Evelyn. She nodded once when our eyes met. Not sympathy, not warmth, just acknowledgement, like 2 business partners passing each other in a hallway after a deal had already closed. At the time, I didn't understand how accurate that moment was. 3 days later, we gathered in a conference room that smelled like polished wood and expensive silence, the reading of the will. I sat at the end of the table, hands folded, back straight, face neutral. I wasn't expecting anything extravagant. Despite his wealth, my father lived like a man preparing for scarcity. He reused envelopes, drove the same car for 15 years, paid in cash whenever possible. But I was his only son. Surely, something. The attorney cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. Real estate holdings? Transferred to Evelyn. Investment accounts? Evelyn. Offshore assets? Evelyn. Trusts? Evelyn. Personal effects? Evelyn. He paused. I waited. The silence stretched. Then came the line that rearranged my understanding of reality. To his son, the attorney said carefully, the deceased leaves no monetary inheritance. No monetary inheritance. No explanation. No elaboration. Just nothing. The room felt suddenly smaller. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask questions. I simply nodded. Across the table, Evelyn exhaled softly. Not relief, satisfaction, like someone who had won something they believed they deserved.
People love to say money changes people. That's wrong. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. And what that moment revealed was this. Everyone in that room had already decided who I was without it. After the meeting, hands were shaken, condolences offered. Phrases like, "Your father was a brilliant man," floated around like empty packaging. Evelyn approached me last. "I'm sure this is a shock," she said. Her voice was smooth, controlled, practiced. "He did what he thought was best," she added. I looked at her, really looked. At the faint smile she tried to hide, at the confidence, at the certainty, and I realized something unsettling. She wasn't lying. She truly believed this was the correct outcome. "I'm sure he did," I replied. She studied my face, perhaps searching for anger. She found none. That unsettled her. That night, I returned to my childhood home. Not the mansion Evelyn now owned, the smaller house my father had lived in before he remarried. It hadn't been sold. No one knew why. I unlocked the door and stepped into a past that smelled like dust, old books, and unfinished conversations. The power still worked. So did the silence. I walked through each room slowly, letting memories surface and pass without grabbing onto them. In the study, his chair was still there, the same one he'd died in. I didn't sit in it. Instead, I stood by the bookshelf and noticed something I hadn't seen before. A recorder. Small, black, old-fashioned. It sat behind a row of legal books, partially hidden, as if it wasn't meant to be found quickly. My pulse changed. Not faster. Sharper. I picked it up. On the back, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. For when they listen. Not if. When. I didn't play it that night. Some things deserve daylight. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the desk as if the room itself had decided to cooperate. I sat, pressed play. At first, there was only static. Then, his voice. Older, tired, but unmistakably him. "If you're hearing this," he began, "then I was right." I closed my eyes. He continued, "I want to be clear, this is not a message of love or apology. It's a record." A pause. "I have spent the last 10 years documenting conversations, agreements, signatures, and decisions made in rooms where the truth was considered optional." My breath slowed. "Everything you were denied on paper exists here in sound." Another pause, longer this time. "I did not leave you money, because money can be taken, twisted, hidden. But truth," he said quietly, "has a way of surviving." I felt something then. Not grief, not anger. Recognition. This wasn't a will. This was a weapon. The recording ended abruptly. No farewell, no "I love you." That was my father. Affection made him uncomfortable. Precision did not. I sat there for a long time afterwards, staring at the recorder. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, birds argued, a neighbor mowed his lawn. Normal life. But mine had just split into 2 timelines. Before I knew, and after. I didn't tell anyone about the recorder. Not friends, not extended family, certainly not Evelyn. Instead, I listened. Every night. Each recording dated, labeled. Board meetings, private dinners, phone calls, conversations where people believed power made them untouchable, including Evelyn, especially Evelyn. She sounded different in those recordings, confident, calculating, careless, the kind of careless that comes from believing no one is listening. But someone had been, always, my father. By the end of the first week, I understood why he'd done it this way. He hadn't disinherited me. He had delayed me. Money would have made this a fight. Truth was going to make it a reckoning. And reckoning takes time. I placed the recorder back on the desk, stood up, and for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood the inheritance. It wasn't cash. It wasn't property. It was something far more dangerous. The truth. And soon, everyone was going to hear it.
I didn't rush. That was the first lesson the recordings taught me. Every voice my father had captured belonged to someone who rushed, to sign, to sell, to secure, to control. Rushing creates noise. Noise hides truth. So I moved carefully. For 2 weeks, I did nothing visible. I answered condolences with brief replies, declined invitations I suddenly received from people who had ignored me for years, let Evelyn assume what she wanted. And she did.
She assumed I was stunned. She assumed I was defeated. She assumed I was harmless. Assumptions are the most expensive mistakes people make when they believe they've already won. The recordings weren't random. They were curated. My father hadn't just pressed record and hoped for the best. He'd constructed a timeline, one that mirrored the slow transfer of power that had taken place right under my nose. Each file began with a date, a location, and then silence. The kind of silence that happens right before people reveal who they really are. One recording stood out early. 3 years before his death, a private dinner. Evelyn, my father, and a man named Charles Whitman. Charles had been my father's business partner for over a decade. Trusted, publicly respected. The kind of man who spoke about ethics in interviews and cut corners in private. In the recording, wine glasses clinked. Soft laughter. Then Evelyn spoke. "You're being sentimental," she said. "That's not like you." My father responded calmly. "It's not sentiment, it's structure." She laughed. "Structure doesn't build legacies. Control does." Charles cleared his throat. "She has a point." That was the moment my father stopped being their equal and became their obstacle. Listening to those conversations was like standing outside a room I'd once been allowed into, now hearing what people said after they believed the door was closed. Evelyn wasn't cruel, she was efficient. Efficiency without conscience is the most dangerous trait of all. She spoke of assets like pieces on a board, of people like variables to be adjusted, including me. "He's not ready," she said at one point, "and he never will be." Silence followed. Then my father spoke. "Ready for what?" he asked. "To lead, to decide, to hold weight." Another pause. "He doesn't want what you want," she added. My father's voice was steady. "That doesn't make him weak." Evelyn sighed. "It makes him irrelevant." That word stayed with me. Irrelevant. People don't fear weakness, they fear irrelevance, because it gives them permission to erase you. The recordings continued. Documents discussed that I'd never seen. Accounts moved through channels I'd never known existed. Agreements made temporarily that somehow became permanent. None of it illegal, all of it unethical. The kind of gray zone manipulation lawyers love and families pretend not to notice. My father had noticed. He'd noticed everything. On day 16, Evelyn called me. Her tone was light, almost friendly. "I've been meaning to check in," she said. "Make sure you're adjusting." Adjusting, as if grief were a new office layout. "I'm fine," I replied. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I was worried you might misunderstand your father's intentions." "I don't think I misunderstand him," I said carefully. A pause. "Interesting." "Well," she said, "if you ever need help finding your footing, I'm happy to offer guidance." Guidance, from the woman who had just taken everything. "That's kind of you," I replied. She waited for more. I gave her nothing. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. She had called to measure me, and she didn't like what she couldn't see. That night, I played a recording I'd been avoiding. It was marked, "If necessary." My father's voice sounded different in this one. Not tired, resolved. "If you're listening to this," he said, "then they believe you are quiet because you are weak." A pause. "Let me be clear. Quiet is how you hear lies breathing." He exhaled slowly. "I could have stopped them," he continued. "I had the authority, the leverage, the power. But power forces people to behave. It doesn't show you who they are when no one is watching." Another pause. "I needed them comfortable, confident, careless." I swallowed. I needed them to believe the game was over. That was when I understood the design. The will wasn't a mistake. It was bait. By giving Evelyn everything, my father had removed all caution. No resistance, no conflict, no suspicion, just opportunity. And people expose themselves fastest when they believe no one is challenging them. The next morning, I made my first move, a small one. I requested copies of company records I was legally entitled to, not as an owner, but as an heir with historical rights. It was routine, harmless, but it created a ripple. Charles called me within hours. "I hear you're asking questions," he said, trying to sound casual. "Just gathering information," I replied. "For what purpose?" he asked. "To understand my father's legacy." A pause. "That legacy belongs to the company now, and the company belongs to Evelyn." "I know," I said. "I just want context." Silence. Then a shift. "Be careful," Charles said. "Digging into the past can be disappointing." I smiled. "I'm prepared for disappointment," I said. We ended the call shortly after. That evening, I received an email. A legal notice, polite, professional, threatening. It warned me against interfering with company operations, against accessing sensitive materials, against misinterpretation. They were nervous. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. I listened to another recording that night. This one involved a regulatory meeting. My father had asked a simple question: what happens if this is reviewed independently? Evelyn answered without hesitation: "It won't be." That was the arrogance of certainty. They believed they had buried the trail. They hadn't counted on my father documenting the burial. I began organizing the recordings, not emotionally, logically. Dates, connections, contradictions. Patterns emerged. Every decision that benefited Evelyn was framed as temporary. Every objection was deferred. Every risk minimized, until nothing could be undone without exposure. They'd trapped themselves. They just didn't know it yet. On day 23, Evelyn called me. Her tone was light, almost friendly. "I've been meaning to check in," she said. "Make sure you're adjusting." Adjusting, as if grief were a new office layout. "I'm fine," I replied. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "I was worried you might misunderstand your father's intentions." "I don't think I misunderstand him," I said carefully. A pause. "Interesting." "Well," she said, "if you ever need help finding your footing, I'm happy to offer guidance." Guidance from the woman who had just taken everything. "That's kind of you," I replied. She waited for more. I gave her nothing. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. She had called to measure me, and she didn't like what she couldn't see. That night, I played one final recording before sleep. My father's voice filled the room. "You will be tempted to reveal everything at once," he said. A pause. "Don't. Truth is most powerful when people recognize it themselves." Another pause. "Let them speak. Let them deny. Let them commit to their version. Then," he said quietly, "let the record play." I turned off the recorder, lay back, and stared at the ceiling. The inheritance wasn't meant to be rushed. It was meant to be released at the exact moment they could no longer escape it. And that moment was getting closer.
By the time people start watching you closely, it's already too late. That was something my father used to say, not as advice, as a warning. Evelyn hadn't started watching me yet, not really. She was distracted by expansion, by numbers climbing, by people praising her vision. Success makes people lazy. It convinces them that outcomes are proof of correctness. But Charles was watching. I could feel it in the timing of emails, in the sudden politeness, in the way doors that had always been closed to me were now cautiously opening, just enough to see what I would do. So I gave him nothing. I stayed quiet, and I listened. The next recording I focused on was dated 18 months before my father's death. A boardroom, 6 voices, one decision that would later be described publicly as unanimous. It wasn't. Someone had objected. That someone had been my father. "You're moving too fast," he said in the recording. "The structure shields risk, but it also hides responsibility." Evelyn responded immediately. "That's the point." A few nervous laughs followed. Then Charles spoke,
calm, reassuring, the way men speak when they want to sound reasonable. We're not hiding responsibility, we're managing perception. My father didn't raise his voice. When perception replaces accountability, he said, collapse is only a matter of timing. Silence. Then the vote. 5 yeses, 1 no. Unanimous, according to the minutes. That was the moment everything changed. Not legally, morally. That was when my father stopped fighting them directly and started documenting them instead. Listening to that recording, I realized something uncomfortable. He hadn't been preparing to win. He'd been preparing to be believed. There's a difference. Winning requires power. Being believed requires patience. I had inherited the second. That would have to be enough. A few days later, I ran into someone unexpected. Margaret Lewis. She had worked under my father for years. Not high profile, not powerful, but precise. The kind of person who noticed details because she didn't waste energy performing. We met by accident, if accidents still exist. She recognized me first. "I'm sorry about your father," she said. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated, then said, "He spoke about you, often." That surprised me. "What did he say?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "That you listened more than people realized." That night, I added a new category to my notes. Witnesses. People who hadn't benefited enough to be loyal and hadn't been punished enough to be afraid. Those were the dangerous ones. I reached out to Margaret 2 days later, carefully, casually, no accusations, no agenda, just questions. She didn't answer them directly, but she didn't avoid them either. She talked about pressure, about meetings that changed tone when my father wasn't present, about decisions that felt off but were never explained. And then she said something that made my pulse steady instead of spike. She said, "Your father wasn't paranoid, he was outnumbered." Outnumbered. That word matters. People love to pretend corruption is rare, that it requires monsters, villains, extreme behavior. It doesn't. It requires consensus. Enough people agreeing to look the other way. That's all. The recordings confirmed it. Not one dramatic betrayal, but dozens of small ones, each justified, each temporary, each reasonable, until they weren't. On day 37, I received another legal notice. Stronger language this time. Mentions of injunctions, consequences, boundaries. I read it slowly, then smiled. They weren't trying to stop me. They were trying to scare me, which meant they didn't know what I had. Good. That night, I listened to a recording labeled simply E. No date, just a single letter. My father's voice was absent in this one, only Evelyn. She was on the phone, angry. "I don't care what he thinks. He'll sign. He always does." A pause. "Yes, I know he hesitates. Let him. He likes feeling principled." Another pause. "If he won't, we move without him." Her voice hardened. "He's old. He wants to believe people are better than they are." Silence. Then the final line. "And his son won't matter. He never does." I turned off the recorder and sat there in the dark. That wasn't grief I felt. It wasn't rage either. It was clarity. The kind that removes emotion and leaves only direction. I understood something then that most people never do. They hadn't taken the money to hurt me. They'd taken it because they believed I was irrelevant, which meant they wouldn't see me coming. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with a regulatory consultant, not to file anything, not yet, just to ask questions, hypothetical ones. Questions about timelines, about thresholds, about what happens when documentation appears years after decisions are made. He answered calmly, then paused, then said, "If what you're implying exists, it wouldn't destroy a company immediately." "That's fine," I said. "What it would do," he continued, "is make everyone inside it start talking." That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't need exposure yet. I needed pressure. Pressure creates fractures. Fractures create witnesses. That evening, I received another message from Charles. Short, carefully worded. "I think we should talk." I looked at the screen for a long time before replying. "So do I." I didn't sleep much that night, not from anxiety, from anticipation. Because the moment someone like Charles wants to talk, it's never to explain, it's to negotiate. And negotiations only happen when power is no longer one-sided. Whatever Evelyn believed, whatever she assumed, whatever she dismissed, the game she thought was over had just reached its most interesting phase. And she still had no idea she was already on the record.
Charles chose the place. That alone told me everything. A quiet restaurant near the financial district, neutral lighting, no music loud enough to interrupt. The kind of place people pick when they want conversations to disappear into background noise. He was already seated when I arrived. Standing would have shown urgency. Sitting showed confidence. He smiled when he saw me, not warmth, calculation. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I was curious," I replied. Curiosity is disarming. It makes people underestimate intent. We ordered. Small talk followed. Weather, markets, empty words designed to test tone. Then he leaned back. "You've been asking questions," he said. "Yes. About things that don't concern you anymore." That was interesting. "Everything that concerned my father concerns me," I replied. He studied my face. "You're not naive," he said finally. "I'll give you that." He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. A folder. Thin. Too thin. "Inside," he said, "is an offer." I didn't touch it. "An offer for what?" I asked. "For peace," he said. "Closure. Freedom." There it was. Not money. Permission to disappear quietly. "Your father built something remarkable," Charles continued. "But legacies evolve. People adapt." "I'm sure," I said. He lowered his voice. "You don't have to carry this," he said. "Whatever you think you've discovered, whatever you believe is wrong." Believe. That word again. "If you walk away," he said, "you'll be taken care of." I finally opened the folder. A number stared back at me. 7 figures. Clean. Immediate. Untraceable. I closed it. "You should keep that," I said. "I wouldn't want it to feel wasted." His smile faded. "This isn't a threat," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's a measurement." He stiffened slightly. "I want you to understand something," he said carefully. "If this turns adversarial, no one wins." "That's not true," I said. "Someone always wins. It's just rarely the loudest person." He watched me longer this time. "You sound like your father," he said. "That wasn't an accident," I replied. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, assessing. Finally, Charles sighed. "You don't know how deep this goes," he said. "I know exactly how deep it goes," I replied. "I've heard it." That did it. The smallest crack. A blink too long. A breath held just a second more than necessary. He leaned forward. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm correcting one." I stood, left the folder on the table, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. People like Charles don't chase. They retreat and regroup. That night, the calls began, not from Evelyn, from others. People who haven't spoken to me in years. Former executives, advisors, consultants. Casual check-ins, subtle concern. The kind of attention that only appears when fear spreads quietly. The pressure was working. I played another recording before bed. My father's voice was softer in this one. "They will try to buy silence first," he said. "Then credibility. Then time." A pause. "If they fail," he continued, "they will attempt to isolate you." I exhaled slowly. Isolation doesn't work when you know it's coming. The next morning, I received an email from Evelyn. No greeting, no warmth, just a meeting request. Urgent. She chose her office. That was a mistake. Her office was a monument to certainty.
Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished surfaces, everything visible, everything controlled. She stood when I entered, didn't offer a hug, didn't offer a seat. "You met with Charles," she said, not a question. "Yes." Her jaw tightened. "What do you want?" she asked. I smiled. "To understand," I said. Her laugh was sharp. "You already understand enough to be dangerous. Let's stop pretending." She stepped closer. "You don't have leverage," she said quietly. "Whatever you think you have, it's not enough." I met her eyes. "You sound nervous," I said. "I sound realistic," she snapped. "Realistic people don't rush meetings, they wait." She turned away, then back. "Your father chose me. He trusted me." "That's true," I said, "until he didn't." Her expression hardened. "He left everything to me," she said. "Yes," I replied, "on paper." Silence, heavy this time. She watched me carefully. "What are you implying?" she asked. "That he planned further than you assumed." Her eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "No," I said, "I'm observing." She dismissed me with a gesture. "This conversation is over. If you continue this path, you'll lose whatever dignity you have left." I stood. "Dignity isn't something you lose, it's something you trade." She didn't respond. As I left, I noticed something new. The confidence was still there, but it was no longer effortless. That evening, Margaret called me. Her voice was tense. "They're asking questions," she said, "about you, about documents, about recordings." I stayed silent. "I think," she continued, "they suspect something exists." "Do they know what?" I asked. "No, and that's what scares them." Good. Fear without clarity spreads faster than truth. I listened to another file that night. This one was my father alone, a note to himself. "If they start fighting each other," he said, "do nothing. Let fear compete." I leaned back and closed my eyes. The system was destabilizing, not because I had spoken, but because I hadn't. The next step would require precision, not exposure, not accusation, just a single undeniable confirmation. One voice, one moment, enough to tip balance into chaos. And I knew exactly which recording would do it. But once released, nothing could be controlled again. That was the cost. Truth doesn't negotiate. It arrives.
There is a moment before a storm when everything goes unnaturally still. That was where I was. I had the recording selected, not the most explosive one, not the one that named names or outlined numbers. That would come later. This one did something far more dangerous. It proved intent. My father's voice had taught me something important. People can survive accusations. They can lawyer their way through numbers. They can even outlast scandal. What they cannot survive is their own voice, calmly explaining why they did what they did. This recording was short, 11 minutes, a private strategy call. Evelyn, Charles, 2 board members, no raised voices, no anger, just certainty. I listened to it again, not for content, but for tone. This was not panic. This was planning. Evelyn spoke first. "If we wait, he'll interfere," she said. "Sentiment will slow everything." Charles agreed. "We don't need his approval, just his absence." One of the board members hesitated. "And the son?" he asked. Evelyn answered without pause. "He doesn't matter." Silence followed. Then the words that made the entire company indefensible. "We move the assets first, then we formalize the narrative." Formalize the narrative. That phrase mattered, because it acknowledged something no document ever could, that the story came after the decision, not the other way around. I turned off the recorder and stared at the wall. Once this was heard, there would be no confusion, no misunderstanding, no interpretation, just truth, spoken casually by people who believed they were untouchable. I slept for 3 hours that night,
Not because I was tired, because clarity doesn't allow rest. The next morning, I did something deliberate. I leaked nothing. Instead, I requested a formal meeting with the board, public, documented, on record. They couldn't refuse without explanation. The reply came quickly. Meeting approved. 2 days later. That was fear. They thought they could still manage me. They were wrong. The day before the meeting, Charles called again. This time he didn't pretend. "What do you want?" he asked. "Accountability," I replied. "You're not in a position to demand it," he said. "That depends on what position you think I'm in." A pause. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm finishing one." He hung up. That night, Margaret sent me a message. One sentence. "They're turning on each other." I closed my eyes. That was inevitable. Fear doesn't unite, it divides. At the meeting, the room felt different. Same table, same chairs, different air. Evelyn sat at the head, Charles 2 seats down. No one made eye contact longer than necessary. I waited until they finished procedural nonsense. Then I spoke. "I want to ask a simple question," I said. They looked at me, some annoyed, some curious. "Do you believe," I continued, "that transparency protects organizations?" Evelyn smiled thinly. "Of course, when it's appropriate." "Appropriate," I nodded. "Then you won't object," I said, "to this being reviewed independently." Silence. Charles cleared his throat. "Reviewed how?" he asked. "Historically, chronologically, in full context." Evelyn leaned forward. "You don't have the authority," she said. "I don't need it. I have standing." That word landed. Standing is a legal concept, and it scared them more than accusations ever could. The meeting ended abruptly. No resolutions, no smiles, just exits. That evening, the first crack appeared. An article, small publication, industry-focused, nothing dramatic, just a headline that asked a question instead of making a claim. Questions are dangerous. They invite answers. The next morning, my phone filled with messages. Journalists, former employees, people who had waited years for permission to speak. I gave none, not yet. Instead, I sent one file to one person, an investigator, independent, reputable, patient. No commentary, no framing, just audio. 11 minutes. By nightfall, Evelyn issued an internal memo. Strong language, firm reassurance, claims of confidence, stability, integrity. I read it once and deleted it. People write memos like that when the ground is already shifting. That night, I played the last recording my father had marked for this phase. His voice was quiet. "Once they realize the story isn't theirs anymore," he said, "they will rush. Rushed people expose patterns." I understood then why he had waited, why he had let them take everything, because the moment they believed they had won was the moment they stopped protecting themselves. I stood by the window and watched the city lights. Somewhere inside those buildings, people were scrambling, emails being deleted, calls being returned, stories being aligned. Too late. The record already existed, and soon it wouldn't belong to me anymore. Part 6 wouldn't be about pressure. It would be about collapse, and collapse never asks permission.
Collapse doesn't announce itself. It arrives disguised as routine. Emails still get sent. Meetings still appear on calendars. People still smile in hallways. But something essential is missing. Confidence. I felt it before I saw it. The calls stopped first, the casual ones, the friendly check-ins. Silence replaced them, thick and deliberate. Silence means instructions are being given. Behind closed doors, people were being told what to say, what not to say, and who to avoid. That was fine. Silence is brittle. It cracks under pressure. The investigator called me 2 days later. His voice was neutral, professional. "This isn't just documentation," he said. "It's narrative proof." Narrative proof. That meant the most dangerous thing of all. It meant intent could be established without interpretation. "You should know," he continued, "once this becomes formal, you won't be able to control the pace." "I don't want to," I replied. He paused. "That's rare," he said. "So is truth," I answered. The first resignation happened quietly. A mid-level executive. No announcement, no farewell email. Just gone. Then another. Then another. People don't leave stable structures without reason. They leave when they sense gravity shifting. Evelyn still hadn't called me. That told me everything. She was fighting fires, delegating blame, calculating damage. People like her don't reach out when they're confident. They reach out when they need leverage. Charles, on the other hand, reached out constantly. Texts, voicemails, emails, each more urgent than the last. I didn't respond. If he wanted a conversation, it would no longer be on his terms. The board scheduled an emergency session. No agenda listed. That was fear made procedural. I attended remotely. Cameras on, faces stiff, voices controlled. Evelyn opened with a statement. "We are experiencing external pressure based on misinformation," she said. Misinformation, the oldest shield. I listened. Charles spoke next. He emphasized loyalty, unity, moving forward. Every word sounded rehearsed. And someone unexpected spoke. Margaret. She hadn't been scheduled. "I'd like to add context," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn's face didn't move, but her eyes did. "I've worked here 17 years, Margaret continued. "I stayed because I believed in the company's values." She paused. "And because I trusted your leadership." Another pause. "I no longer do." No accusations, no recordings, just a witness choosing timing. Evelyn cut in. "This isn't appropriate." "It is," Margaret said calmly, "because silence is how this happened." That was it. Once one person speaks, others realize they can breathe. Questions followed, not from me, from inside the room. The meeting ended without conclusion. That's when institutions start dying, not when they're attacked, when they can't agree on reality. The article became a series, then a feature, then a headline no one could ignore. Not explosive, careful, documented, voices quoted, patterns outlined. By the time Evelyn finally called me, her voice was different. Not sharp, controlled but strained. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" I asked. "About resolution," she replied. Resolution, the word people use when outcomes are no longer optional. "I think," I said, "that time has passed." A pause. "You don't want this to destroy everything your father built," she said. I closed my eyes. "My father built truth," I replied. "You built on top of it." Silence. Then, very quietly, "What do you want?" I answered honestly. "I want the record to be complete." She hung up. That night, I listened to one final recording, not a strategy, not evidence, a private note my father had left at the end. His voice was weaker, but certain. "They will call this betrayal," he said. "They always do." A pause. "But betrayal requires loyalty." "I never betrayed them. I documented them." Another pause. "You may feel guilt when it ends. Don't confuse that with doubt."
I sat in the dark long after the recording ended. The next morning, regulators announced a formal review. Stock prices dipped, lawyers mobilized, public statements were drafted and revised and deleted. By evening, Charles resigned. Evelyn remained, for now. People like her don't leave until the very end. They believe survival is possible even in ruins. But ruins don't negotiate. They collapse. Part 7 wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be dramatic. It would be quiet, personal, and final. Because the most devastating truth isn't public. It's undeniable. And once heard, it can't be unheard.
The end didn't come with sirens. No arrests, no dramatic walkouts, no cameras chasing anyone down marble steps. It came quietly, the way truth usually does. Evelyn resigned on a Friday afternoon. Not publicly, not ceremoniously, a single internal notice, carefully worded, neutral language, mutual agreement. People like her don't fall. They step aside when standing becomes impossible. I read the message once and closed my laptop. I didn't feel victory. I felt weight lifting. That's the difference between revenge and resolution. Revenge demands emotion. Resolution releases it. The company survived. Smaller, humbled, watched. That mattered to me more than destruction. My father hadn't built something to see it burn. He'd built it to reveal who deserved to stand inside it. In the weeks that followed, people reached out, some to apologize, some to explain, some to rewrite history. I listened. I didn't argue. When people are exposed, they don't need confrontation. They need silence to hear themselves. Margaret came by one evening. We sat in the same study where it had all begun. The recorder rested on the desk between us. "I didn't know if you'd ever use it," she said. "I didn't either," I replied. She hesitated. "Do you ever wish," she asked, "that he'd just left you the money?" I thought about it, about the ease, the simplicity, the emptiness. "No," I said, "money ends conversations." "This started one," she said softly. She was right. After she left, I sat alone and played the final file, the one my father hadn't labeled. His voice was barely above a whisper. "If you're listening to this," he said, "then everything worked." A pause. "I know this wasn't easy," he continued, "but easy never teaches restraint." Another pause. "I didn't leave you money, because money answers questions too quickly." Silence. "I needed you to understand people," he said, "and now you do." I closed my eyes. He was right. I understood them, and more importantly, I understood myself. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete. A few months later, I declined an offer to step into leadership, not because I couldn't, because I didn't need to. Power had already taught me what it was trying to hide. I kept the recorder, not as evidence, as a reminder that truth doesn't need permission, that silence isn't weakness, that being underestimated is often a gift. People still ask what my father left me. I let them guess. Some think it was nothing. Some think it was everything. Both are wrong. He left me something far rarer, clarity. And once you have that, the rest stops mattering.